Hello, everyone, and welcome to Carpet City Cinema, a Hilo Films podcast. I'm David Weaver, and had a pretty nice reunion of sorts earlier this week. I think I may have alluded to it before that Jay Leonard of Trenchmouth Productions, producer of The Last Frankenstein, filmmaker extraordinaire of his own right, and I are working on launching a new podcast, one in which each episode will be interviewing different people in the greater, well, it doesn't just have to be the greater upstate New York area. It could be even outside that too, but basically people who are in some way or other connected with film media. We did a pilot episode we recorded just where we kind of reintroduced ourselves to people. And then the other day we had a chance to sit down with Jason Radlin, who is a professor in multiple media. His background is in theater, but he also teaches film classes and different types of communication courses at a local SUNY college, SUNY Montgomery County. And both Jay and I had him as teachers years ago when we were there at that college at different times. And we decided to take an opportunity to reconnect with him. He's always been a big supporter of arts in the area. He was a big supporter of both our projects. We shot part of the Last Frankenstein Kickstarter video at the theater at the college, which Jason was kind enough to give us access to. And Jay's had a lot of different interactions with him as well. So we're really looking forward to getting about half a dozen episodes or so locked down, recorded before we drop those. Still got to think of a name for the show too, but exciting, good time had. Good reunion was had. Moving on, some interesting developments in physical media. It's come out that Disney is going to be handing over the reins of all of its physical media to Sony. Which is a big game changer. A little while ago, Disney shut down completely its physical media operations in Australia. And, it's kind of always had a weird relationship, Disney, with physical media. Way back in the day, of course, they were pretty prolific in Laserdisc era, VHS era. But then as time went on, they kind of had this whole thing about the vault. We're going to release this movie, this animated classic movie on VHS, and then we're going to have it out for a while and then put it back in the vault. It was this weird kind of schizophrenic approach maybe to drive up demand. For a while back in the late VHS, early DVD era, they actually had a licensing deal with Anchor Bay, which, if you're not familiar with Anchor Bay, they were the king of kind of like cult cinema boutique labels. While Criterion was starting out in the early days of like Laserdisc and DVD, they were known for like the art house and critically acclaimed product. And Anchor Bay, they did some critically acclaimed films as well too, but they're also a big home to cult cinema. They did tons of Hammer film titles and Giallo films and all kinds of stuff. They were able to get a deal with Disney back in the day. They were putting out stuff like, not like top tier stuff. Probably the biggest title they ever put out was The Black Hole. Disney obviously kept their hands on their, animated classics and big live action product. But, Disney, they eventually, I think that was the last time that Disney ever licensed out Disney branded product to another outfit. Because then, as Disney picked up and acquired like ABC and other properties, they eventually got to the point where they'd license some of their product out to other companies, but it would not the Disney branded stuff. So, for example, they had a distribution deal with MGM back in like this is like after Anchor Bay deal ended and still though in the early days of DVD, and they would license out like a lot of their ABC product to MGM. For example, so that's why you had MGM DVDs of stuff like The Day After and the Night Stalker TV movies, and then as we got into like the Blu-ray era and stuff, they were, working really well with like Kino Lorber, for example, allowing Kino Lorber to access titles from like the Touchstone Pictures, Hollywood Pictures catalogs, titles from the ABC catalogs, of course. Disney also owns a lot of the stuff that David O. Selznick produced, which is how Kino was able to put out titles like The Spiral Staircase and The Farmer's Daughter. And they were also continuing to work with like Criterion, which had access to Rebecca and Notorious, the Hitchcock films, which Disney owned, and the Criteria put those out. But then things changed with about the time they acquired Fox. So Disney bought out 20th Century Fox and owned that, and that was kind of right around the same time that they launched their streaming app, Disney Plus, and that was also kind of all around the time that everything happened with COVID. When all this stuff started happening at the same time, Disney basically shut down their whole operations of licensing stuff out. They were like, we're not going to license any of these catalogs out. It's not just Disney stuff, but even the non-Disney stuff that we own, the non-Disney branded titles, we're just not going to let anyone else have those. And it was thought that was kind of a way that they were trying to drive people towards their streaming app. Well, as we all know, streaming rose really quickly, especially in the COVID era. But there's a kind of a sense that having left behind physical media was a mistake. A lot of these different companies, because there's such a low cost investment in physical media. You're just basically, you already own the titles, so you're just basically printing discs, or you're just signing a licensing deal with another company to do that. And there was this thought that maybe as Bob Iger returned to head Disney, that maybe we'd be returning to seeing Disney being willing to partner with other labels again, license out their product. But it seems they're actually going to a much more aggressive stance, which is just to give everything to another label, another studio, and just, all right, Sony, you take over this completely, which isn't totally a novel thing. Like Warner Brothers had this brief moment where they were distributing Paramount product. And I remember back in the DVD era, there was either MGM or Fox. One was distributing for the other. I forget which was which. So it's not totally unheard of that they're doing this, but it'd be interesting to see what happens. And it'll be interesting to see if this gets any more deep cut titles out. I mean, is Sony just going to basically take the titles that are currently out on Blu-ray and just keep those going? Are they going to dig into the vaults to pull out stuff that hasn't been out in a while, or stuff that hasn't been out ever? Are they going to sub-license stuff to boutique labels again? Who knows? It's too early to say. One of the biggest immediate impacts, though, is that Disney will be shutting down the Disney Movie Club. So that was basically their version of Columbia House. What was that? Columbia House Records, right? And VHS tapes back in the day, where you'd buy one CD for full price, and then you'd get one half off and three for a penny each, and you just had to buy one at full price a year for the next 3 years or something like that. And that Disney did the exact same thing with the Disney Movie Club, which is cool because there's a lot of stuff, classic titles, available on DVD and Blu-ray through the Disney Movie Club that are only available there. They're just completely exclusive titles. And really great movies, too, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea on Blu-ray, The Parent Trap, Pollyanna, Return to Oz, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And, I joined the club a long time ago and just been stacking up on all these titles because it's the only way to get them on Blu-ray or sometimes even DVD. The good thing that kind of sucked about the Disney Movie Club was that when Disney was putting these classic titles in stores on DVD, like I said, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or The Parent Trap, they would do these incredible 2-disc editions loaded with tons of extras. They were really killer releases. And then when they went to put them on Blu-ray, they're like, all right, we're going to release this on Blu-ray, but it's just going to be a Disney Movie Club exclusive. They just would not port over any of the extras. So it'd just be a bare bones disc, which kind of sucked because they're really incredible extras that they put there. So the Movie Club, though, is going to shut down completely. I think it's like you can put your last order like the end of May, if you remember. And people are wondering, do we need to go full hoarder, and just stack up on everything that the club has to offer, or are these titles going to be coming out again, maybe through a new form of the Disney Movie Club, or just through some kind of retail offering via Sony? No one knows, and I don't think anybody's going to there'll be an exact comment on that from Sony or Disney. Fortunately, I've been kind of keeping up with the titles as they come along, and my main interest is in the older stuff they have, but I might have to do a little panic buying closer to May 20th. We'll see. But also, speaking of like studios making big moves, another thing there's a really interesting article in Variety that caught my eye the other day, and was talking about how Warner Brothers has been going spend crazy lately to attract top talent. So they've been really aggressive about like trying to court Quentin Tarantino to make what purports to be his final film, The Film Critic, under their umbrella. Of course, word is that he's probably going to go with Sony because they produced Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But they've also been they signed up a deal with Ryan Coogler and Michael B. Jordan, who are going to continue their long collaborations, as director and actor, which they had previously done on like Fruitvale Station and Creed and Black Panther. Um, they are spending lavishly on the Joker sequel. They've got the Paul Thomas Anderson, his new movie with DiCaprio under works, and I believe they just announced yes, they did just announce that they are going to be producing Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu's next movie, which will star Tom Cruise. And other studios, and are kind of wondering why are they going, why are they spending so much money? Because sometimes the investments they're making don't seem practical. For example, even though Paul Thomas Anderson is an acclaimed filmmaker, his movies don't really. A lot of times they cost more to make than they bring in. Um, Another title that they got in the works is Maggie Gyllenhaal's upcoming Frankenstein movie, which was something that Netflix had passed on, even though Gyllenhaal's coming off her triumphant directorial effort, The Lost Daughter. So people are kind of wondering why is Warner Brothers willing to spend so much money, even though it looks like even though, it looks like there might not be the return on investment in terms of ticket sales or streaming revenue, and it's thought that actually what's going on is that they're prepping for another merger. So Warner Brothers and Discovery merged together. There was a merger that created the company Warner Brothers Discovery a few years ago, and there was some kind of legal lockup where they couldn't do any more mergers or anything of that sort for a few years after that. And that time period is coming to an end where they can now make another merger happen. And it's believed that the execs at Warner's are looking ahead to that, and they're basically like, let's bring in all the A game talent we can, all the top tier talent we can, sign them up for contracts, get movies produced. Variety made a really good analogy. They said it's comparable to painting your house before selling it. And so some people are wondering if there'll just be another merger very soon. And I guess according to the article, that the idea of a merger between Warner Brothers and NBC Universal is possible. That's being discussed. Which would be interesting to see if that stuff, like, I seem to remember when Warner Brothers and Discovery merged that there was a good deal of pushback on that and analysis on that in terms of whether or not it was creating a monopoly situation. And there's still a few other studios out there. Obviously, it's not like the golden age of the film studio where there was so many entities that don't even essentially exist anymore, like RKO Radio Pictures and Republic Pictures. Or United Artists, but there's still a few out there. You still got Lionsgate and Paramount, and we got Warner Brothers and Sony and Universal, Disney. But obviously, the playing field is definitely getting smaller. And I just wonder that even if they do want to merge with NBC Universal, I wonder if something like that would even be allowed to go through. Because NBC Universal that's a subsidiary of Comcast, and there's just so much under those two banners if they were to come together. But we'll see. Time will tell. But I just thought it was an interesting look at what's going on behind the scenes, especially with all we've seen in the past with these studios kind of joining forces. Disney being a great example. They bought Fox, they bought ABC, they bought Marvel and Lucasfilm. And Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers is a huge empire on its own because they own New Line Cinema, and they own most of the RKO catalog, and they own pretty much every MGM movie made up from the silent era up to like the early '80s. They're huge, and a lot of allied artists and monogram titles. So we'll see. We shall see. And in other news, moving on to upcoming releases, Imprint Films, the Australian label, which has just been hitting home run after home run, has just dropped their title announcements for May and totally killing it. It's just an incredible slate of films that they have coming out. So they're releasing 6 discs in May with a total of 7 movies, because one of them's a double feature. And a couple of them are, familiar faces. They're doing The Man Who Haunted Himself, which is a Roger Moore film from 1970. It was like one of the last films he starred in before he got the role of James Bond. And that's been out. Like Kino Lorber put that out on Blu-ray. which I think is just went out of print now, or at least has been discontinued. It might not be out of print yet, but that's a familiar face. And they're also doing The Queen of Spades on Blu-ray, the acclaimed British film, which actually has a 4K release out of the UK. So those two are, it's solid type choices, but there's versions of those available already. But it's the other ones where they're just really killing it. And so first up, they're doing the double feature is a two-pack of The Uninvited and The Unseen. So The Uninvited, 1944 ghost movie, haunted house movie starring Ray Milland. And it's a classic film, Academy Award nominated flick, where Ray Milland and his sister, played by Ruth Hussey, they end up buying this large estate on the coast, on the British coast, and only to find out that it has a legend of being haunted by this wife or slash mother who used to live there with her family. And they are constantly visited at the house by the daughter of this dead woman, whose grandfather sold the house to them, and who keeps coming back to the place and is drawn to it inexorably. And it's just it's a landmark horror film. Has also a charm to it. Big part thanks to Ray Milland, who just was so good with a light touch, but also is very effective in its mood building and its atmosphere. It's kind of considered one of the great classic era ghost movies. And it's had its time on physical media for sure. Criterion put it out on Blu-ray already. And so this was a 1944 film, but the thing that makes this set so impressive is that they're also including on this from 1945, The Unseen. So basically Paramount, after the success of The Uninvited, were like, let's do this again. So they got Lewis Allen, who directed The Uninvited, and they got Gail Russell, who played the young leading lady of The Uninvited, not Ray Milland's sister, but the young daughter drawn back to the house. They got both of those people from The Uninvited, and they said, let's make another horror film, and brought on Joel McCrea to be the lead. And the plot of this, actually, interestingly, the screenplay was co-written by Raymond Chandler, the great film noir writer who created Philip Marlowe. And the plot of it is it sounds a little bit like The Turn of the Screwish, but and I've not seen it. Is that I'm just going to quote it right off the good old IMDb here. A secretive widower hires a governess for his children. Strange occurrences and the governess's curiosity lead her to unlock the secrets of the mysterious and uninhabited brownstone next door. So it sounds like a really a solid ghostly premise. But the thing about this film is it's never had any physical media release ever, even going back to VHS or Laserdisc at all. And at last update, there were legal issues, clearance issues preventing it from having any kind of release, at least in the U.S. So the fact that the imprint is finally giving us this is extremely exciting. I don't know if, again, this is a situation where the legal issues have been resolved or they were just impacting only U.S. territories. But either way, it's just really stoked that this one is finally going to come out. Next up, they're also including in the slate from 1965, the British chiller Catacombs, also known by the title The Woman Who Wouldn't Die. And this is another one I don't believe has ever had any disc release in the U.S. I know there's a British DVD release, which is out of print. So this is, in this being on Blu-ray, it will be a worldwide first. And this movie stars Gary Merrill, who was Betty Davis's husband back in the day, appeared with her in several films, such as All About Eve. He was also on the TV show The Time Tunnel. And the premise of this, I quote, is an astute businesswoman is completely devoted to her faithless husband, who must kill her to carry on with her pretty young niece. It turns out that the dead don't die so easily. Again, just another title that's been kind of way on the back of the shelves collecting dust, and glad that it's finally going to get some light put on it. It's directed by Gordon Hessler, who's a really well-known director of horror. He did films like The Oblong Box with Vincent Price. Actually did a couple of Vincent Price movies. He also did Cry of the Banshee and Scream Again. He did the Ray Harryhausen's film, The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. So definitely a familiar a name to fans of the genre. So again, just really excited that this is going to get a Blu-ray release. Next up after that is one that I actually have seen from 1945, Woman Who Came Back. This is one I saw during one of my Octoberthon viewings a few years ago. There was a DVD of it in the U.S. put out by Image Entertainment, which is out of print now. And it's a film that was released by, it was independently produced, but then picked up by Republic Pictures back in the day, and they released it. But it's a really, really good, very atmospheric, uh, incredibly well filmed, very stylishly shot horror tale set at Halloween time, which is pretty cool because before John Carpenter did Halloween, it wasn't such a it wasn't so easily thought of to have a horror film being set at Halloween. Like, it seems like such an obvious choice now, but that wasn't very common. In fact, there's only a handful of films I can think of that were either horror or horror adjacent that had a Halloween setting, and usually it was just like one scene. Like, I Was a Teenage Werewolf has a Halloween party scene in it. I mean, Arsenic and Old Lace, which is a black comedy, is probably the one that has the most action actually set at Halloween time. But this movie opens up at Halloween, and it stars Nancy Kelly, who is best remembered for playing the mother in the 1956 horror classic The Bad Seed, role for which she was given earned a Best Actress Oscar nomination. But she's plays a young woman who's returning basically to her hometown in New England, and she's riding a bus back home, and the bus stops and picks up this very scary old woman, very witch-like, who sits next to her. And then the bus has a terrible accident, crashes through guardrails, goes off into a reservoir. And our leading lady, played by Nancy Kelly, as I mentioned, she manages to make her way to the local village. And of course, emergency personnel, they come out to the scene of the accident and they recover all these bodies, but they can't find the body of this old woman who was supposedly aboard the bus. And as time passes, our protagonist, who is a descendant of the last descendant of a famed New England witch hunter, she begins to observe all these things happening around her that seem to have dark supernatural aspects. And as she begins researching into the past, her family's past, she begins to wonder if she is falling prey to a malevolent spirit, which may be trying to inhabit her. And these strange events that start happening around her start to gain the attention of the local townspeople and start to arouse all kinds of superstitious beliefs and paranoia. It's a really, really strong film, and one that is definitely underseen. It's really gone under the radar, but a lot of people probably aren't familiar with it. And so that Imprint is, again, bringing this back out, giving it a high-def release. Very, very excited for this. And last is going back to 1934. This is a Columbia Pictures title, so Imprint picked this up from one of their Sony deals, is Black Moon. Now, this does have a DVD release here in the States, but this is the first Blu-ray release of the film. And we talked, I think, a couple episodes back about difficulties some of the studios are having with Sony and issues with being able to put out special features and stuff, for example. And so this release actually is bare bones, other than there's a trailer on it, and there's both the black and white and a tinted version of the film, but there's no commentary tracks or anything like that, which I'm sure they would want to put those on that. But this film, I did see this film also, and in many ways, like Woman Who Came Back, it's a very underexposed horror title that's really interesting, just in the way their whole approach to it. So the idea of this movie is it's about this basically centers around a female protagonist, a character named Juanita, whose parents were killed during a voodoo ritual on a tropical island. And she eventually returns to the island in her adulthood. And by this time, she's got a young daughter, and she's married, although her husband, who's a businessman, is not with her. And she goes back to this island, ends up staying with her uncle, and comes to discover that the natives actually regard her as like a voodoo goddess, as like someone who should be their leader, and that they were using her in their rituals back when she was a child. And she actually becomes immersed in this whole voodoo religion and drawn deeper into it. And as as the situation progresses, it's to the point where even like her family is in danger. Like she would be even willing to, for example, maybe sacrifice her daughter. She really becomes immersed in this the voodoo practices and rites. And her husband comes to the island to try to end this horrible situation and bring some clarity. Uh, but there's no, he finds it so difficult to reason with her. And it's such an interesting film because it's very much a horror movie, but it also underlying it is this whole subtext about the deterioration of a marriage, really, and it's using topics like voodoo as a plot mechanism, but really it's this. You could just as much substitute voodoo voodoo practices for alcoholism or for putting your job before your family or for an affair, anything that really kind of anything that kind of injects itself into a relationship and basically consumes the attention of one of the two people in a relationship to the detriment of the relationship itself, and eventually, deteriorating the relationship. And that's what this film, underneath the horror aspects of it, is also dealing with. And it's really fascinating because the horror aspects are fascinating, but the fact that it's also dealing with this kind of, marriage. Breaking apart is also very engrossing, and the two melt together really well. It works really well on both those levels. It's a pre-code film, so it's got a nice bite to it. It was directed by Roy William Neal, who horror fans know for such movies as The Black Room with Boris Karloff, and he directed Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. But he also directed almost all of the Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce Sherlock Holmes films, which I mentioned I'm a huge fan of. There are 14 of those, and he directed 11 of them. So again, this is interesting too. I was always tempted to buy the DVD of it, but it was a DVD that Sony released. It was bare bones, and it was like one of their manufactured on-demand ones. And you think those would be like $10 a piece because you could basically make those in your computer, but they go full price on those, like $20. I'm like, is someone gonna put this on Blu-ray? It's a really good movie. So really excited that even though there's not much in the way of bonus content, this is finally getting a high def release. So that rounds it up for Imprint's May, and like I said, just unbelievable roster of titles that they have coming. All right, enough of that. We're now on to the movie of the week. Last week we talked about The Omen, the 1976 horror classic. So logic dictates that tonight we talk about the 1978 sequel, Damien Omen II. This was a first-time watch for me and was a big impetus for me even getting back into the Omen films because I had always wanted to see the second one. I had had no contact with it at all, just read about it. And I liked it. It's a good sequel. It's a different kind of vibe than the original. The original was kind of this, as we talked about last week, was this it was about Gregory Peck being inexorably drawn deeper and deeper into this mystery, this supernatural, satanic horror mystery, and just immersed in it as the film progressed and just got increasingly darker and more sinister and also more depressingly overwhelming. And this film has similarities, but it's also kind of a little bit more, and I don't mean this in a bad way at all, it's a little more gutsy, a little more schlocky in its horror approach, and we'll get into that in a little bit because this had some production problems that aren't really terribly evident in the finished product, but might explain kind of the different take. But I just want to start off by saying, good film, definitely recommend it. So this film, other than a prologue, a brief prologue, takes place like 7 years after the events of the first film. And Damien, the Antichrist child, he's 12 years old. He lives with his uncle, which is played by William Holden, who's playing would be Gregory, the brother to Gregory Peck's character from the first film. And they're in Chicago. So there's him, his uncle played by William Holden. William Holden has a son, which would be Damien's cousin. Mark, who's they're basically about the same age, and then he has his wife, which is actually his second wife, so it's his son's stepmom, Anne, played by the incredible Lee Grant, and the film starts out, the boys are about to return to the military academy that they go to, and basically as the film progresses, we're seeing all these different things happening, all these different moves on the chessboard that will work towards setting up Damien in the future to become the Antichrist. At this point, like I said, he's 12 years old. He doesn't even know that he's the Antichrist. But there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes, moves made, as in the first film, by people who are in league with the devil, and who are working to further the cause of the Antichrist without necessarily telling Damien or letting him know who he is. And we'll get a little bit in the spoiler territory here. I'm not going to reveal any big spoilers, but some of the stuff, it's kind of hard to talk about the film without addressing it a little bit. But I thought it was really interesting how the film lays the groundwork for what would be the future for an Antichrist who now is only like 12 years old, who's now only like a teenager. So in other words, the idea of the Antichrist is that he's going to eventually, rule the world and rule have the entire world under his control, over a one government control, one military power control. And how would that happen? How would how would things progress in history, in politics, in society, that in such a way that would ever allow for something like that to realistically happen? And you see it in this film. The way they lay that foundation is that the Thorn family, which is Robert Thorn was the character that Gregory Peck played, and William Holden is Richard Thorn. They own a very huge, successful, powerful industrial company, which has its hands in electronics and all kinds of different branches of industry. And one of the areas that they have kind of have started to feel around in is basically the business of food, the business of hunger. And they have this higher up executive in the company, played by the great Robert Foxworth, who really wants to see the company involved in controlling the food market, because he says that's the future. He's trying to convince William Holden, who's the head of the company, like this is where things are going to go in the future. Yes, we're really powerful in electronics and these other areas. We should keep up with that, but we shouldn't neglect the fact that food, is this basic need that people have, and we are this company, the Thorn Company, is developing technologies that will allow for mass food production, and there's potential to buy up massive chunks of land in basically third world parts of the globe, third world countries, and so that they can buy up this land and then basically terraform it with their technology, and then they control the food market in these horribly poor countries and essentially control the people there. Now, Robert Foxworth's character doesn't put it in those words, but it presents an ethical dilemma to the company, because William Holden's character, as Richard Thorn, is an ethical person. He as Robert Foxworth is whispering these things into his ear, on his other side is another company exec, played by the great legendary Lou Ayres. Classic 1930s, 40s Academy Award nominated leading man, who is telling him, no, this is unethical. It possibly illegal, but definitely unethical. We shouldn't be, basically turning parts of the world into essentially slaves just so we can advance our business interests. And so you have this whole dynamic going on in Thorn Industries, and you can, right as they lay it out for you, right as they're presenting this whole issue through the narrative, you can totally see, okay, like if they go through this plan and it's successful and they buy this land and terraform it and whatever, yeah, like 20, 30 years from now, whatever, by which time Damien would be an adult, this company that he could theoretically one day be the head of would basically control huge sections of the world just by controlling the food. And it's just really well thought out, like that approach to making the premise of one person controlling the world be believable. And not to be some kind of extremist or anything, but in a way we kind of almost see echoes of that now, not to that extreme where I think that, don't take me the wrong way, I'm not saying there's an Antichrist out there or that there's one person about to take over the world, but we do, it's that age-old story about how so much of the world's wealth is controlled by just a few people, and like you think about people like Bezos and Elon Musk and Zuckerberg, and it's just really, they just control massive massive sections of society as a whole. And so I just found that really fascinating, especially in a film that's 1978. It's very forward thinking and very intriguing. So like I said, though, okay, so as the film, it's a horror film too. So as the film progresses, in order to achieve these ends necessary to allow Damien to become the Antichrist, not only do these business machinations need to play out, but also people have to die because there are people who are standing in the way of progress. People who would either threaten Thorn Industries or who could expose, who are aware. There are people who are aware that Damien is the Antichrist and who want to bring that knowledge to William Holden, who, of course, has no clue that that's what's going on. He's under the impression that basically his brother had a mental health crisis, and that's why he tried to kill Damien, especially in connection with the death of his own wife, Lee Remick's character. So the film definitely delivers on its horror aspects too. It's not just like a geopolitical thriller. And to that end, this film has some really great horror moments, really great kill scenes. So, like again, the first film, of course, had the classic, David Warner decapitation scene, which is not a spoiler. You'd have to know about that by now. And all the motifs in the first film of the Rottweiler dogs. This film goes for birds like crows or ravens. I can never tell. It's just blackbirds. Blackbirds. We'll just say blackbirds just to be safe. That's the horror motif in this one. No dogs this time around. It's just blackbirds. But it just has some really great horror kill scenes. They are incredibly well designed and very effective. Not just in terms of like shock power or strength of horror, but also just like there's a great. I won't give too much detail away or who it's about, but there's a great death scene at a frozen lake, and it's just incredibly well filmed. It's something they really draw it out, but in a really good way, and in a way that really kind of drives home the horror of what the person dying must be going through. There's a really great elevator-based death scene. I won't give anything away about that, but probably one of the better-known scenes from the film. So the film's not only really good in terms of giving you this meaty narrative, but like I said, also delivering the horror punches in a way that's, like I said, it's a little more. Not that it's less artistic. I think that's a problem to have. Sometimes people think, "Oh, this is a little more schlockier. It's a little more in your face, so it's a little less artistic." I think that's something that a lot of people walk away with the first two Omen films. They're kind of like, well, the second one's fun too, but it's not quite as artistic as the first. Well, the thing is, you can be schlocky. Schlock is its own form of art. And so you can be schlockier, you can be more in your face, more graphic, more gory, more hard hitting. And that is its own form of art, no less or worse than something more quote unquote artistic. It's all about how well you carry it out. That's really what it comes down to. It's not about the type. It's not about the way you deliver the message. It's about how skillfully it's done. It's how effective is it. So that is in no way meant to imply that by being a little more rough and tough, that this film is any lesser by virtue of that than the original. Now, I do think it is probably a little step down from the original. But not by much. I think it's definitely a very worthy sequel. I think it kind of stumbles a little bit. And well, let's talk about the production of the film, because that's kind of going to lay the groundwork for that. So this film was originally supposed to be directed by Mike Hodges. So Mike Hodges had directed the classic early '70s British crime film. He was a British director, Get Carter with Michael Caine, and of course it's a legendary film. Continued to cement Caine's status as a leading man. Of course, they remade it umpteen million years later with Stallone. And after that, he had done a couple more films. He did another film with Michael Caine called Pulp. He did the Michael Crichton adaptation, The Terminal Man, with George Segal. And so then along came Damien Omen II. Well, so he comes on as director, and about 4 weeks into principal photography, he is replaced. It's that classic thing where if you read up on Wikipedia, then you go from Wikipedia to the original source articles, because you can't trust Wikipedia, but you go to the original interviews and source articles, and you look it up on the AFI, American Film Institute's website. It's kind of hard to totally get a sense of what did Hodges leave or was Hodges fired, but there's definitely a parting of the ways, and what it comes down to is obviously disagreements between him and the producer Harv Bernhard about the approach. both in terms of, Bernhard was looking for something that was a little more horror heavy, a little more on the nose horror, and also there seemed to be some disagreements about the time that Hodges was willing to take to film. So when you first see Damien in the movie, uh, he's walking on the grounds of the Thorn estate, and it's like a shot of him, kind of like profile as he's walking along, and there's a guy working on the grounds as like a gardener, and he's like burning like leaves or clippings or whatever, and so he's got this little fire going. So Damien is walking in profile, he stops and then turns and walks towards the camera. Well, when he stops, so he's standing right behind the fire. So the fire is in between the lens and him, and then he starts walking forward. So now he's becoming larger and larger behind the flames, and it's it's a very obvious symbolism. He's the Antichrist and hell and flames and fire, and it's an example of something that like it took a little while to set that shot up, and that was like Harv Bernhard, the producer's like, this is a bunch of BS that we're taking all this time just to make this little artistic shot or whatever. Whereas Hodges felt stuff like that was important. I thought it was, I thought it was cool. I thought it was appropriate because even though it's like, it's not subtle, but it's also like, well, it's the Omen movies. It's where a guy gets his head cut off by a flying sheet of glass. We don't need to have it like, and we know that this is Damien. It's like, it's not like we know who Damien Thorn is. We know he's going to be the Antichrist. So it's not like, there's no surprise here. And so it would be interesting to see how it would have played out if Hodges had directed it. That's the kind of thing, like in a perfect world where it would have been cool to see both cuts of the film, like how it turned out, and then also what would have been like had Hodges finished his work on the film. Now, he still was left with a co-writer credit, and he still went on to direct classic movies. He did Flash Gordon, of course, in the early 80s, and then Croupier with Clive Owen, which is really one of Owen's first big films. But to replace him, they brought in Don Taylor. So Don Taylor started his career out as an actor and was in some really, really big roles in really big films. He's, the original Father of the Bride with Spencer Tracy. He's the son-in-law, and then they did a sequel to that. It was so big. And then in Stalag 17, Billy Wilder's classic Academy Award-winning film set at a POW camp, he plays the American POW who the prisoners are going to great lengths to hide from the Nazis. And I don't know if there's any, this may have just been a coincidence, of course, but Stalag 17 is the film that won William Holden his Oscar for Best Actor. So I don't know. I don't think that necessarily had anything to do with Taylor being brought in to direct this film, because I think it had probably more to do with him. I mean, he had done stuff at Fox already by this time. But it is an interesting thing to note, the connection. So Taylor continued to act. He's acting throughout the 50s, and eventually at some point, I think in the 60s, segued into directing. And did some kind of like B films, some beach party kind of films, some TV movies. And then the 70s started getting that profile higher and higher. He did Escape from the Planet of the Apes, which some consider one of the best if not the best Planet of the Apes sequels. I think it's kind of either that or Conquest, maybe Conquest, but that's for another discussion. He did Tom Sawyer, the musical with Johnny Whitaker and Jodie Foster, which got several Oscar nominations. And I don't know if he did it after. It was right around this time he also did The Island of Dr. Moreau with Burt Lancaster. And he would also do The Final Countdown, which is the cult classic 1980 time-traveling Pearl Harbor movie where Kirk Douglas's aircraft carrier goes back in time to 1941 and has a chance to prevent Pearl Harbor. Really fun film. But anyways, he was brought in to direct this because he was also, one thing he was known for was getting things done on time. He was like a no-nonsense kind of guy. And he delivered the goods. They got everything finished up. But it's interesting to wonder if some of the things that come across in the film as problematic are the result of issues that would have been inherent regardless of who finished directing the film, or if they're just problems associated with kind of two visions coming to clash. So there are parts in the film where things develop really rapidly, like for example, Damien coming to realize that he is the Antichrist. That's something that I think ideally would be something that would be depicted as a slow realization, like him, piecing things together, and taking him having to take time to accept that as a fact, that that's who he is. Because, I mean, that's obviously, this is set in the real world where the idea of like, oh, an Antichrist, so, to the average person, the idea of an Antichrist sounds laughable. It's something that's very believable within certain religious circles, but outside of those, people think that sounds crazy. So the idea that, a 12-year-old boy, you're going to convince him that he is going to, be the supernatural world leader someday, I think that would take a little bit for him to ingest and come to believe. But instead, it basically comes down to him having a conversation with someone in the film, one of the evil acolytes of the devil, and that person basically saying, to summarize it, don't you know who you are? Read this chapter of the Bible. And so like Damien goes and grabs a Bible and reads that part of the Bible, and then realizes he's got the 666 tattoo mark on his head, birthmark on his head, and he's like, "Oh, I'm the Antichrist." Like it's like so quick. It's like one minute he just is like, "I just always felt a little strange about myself. I feel like I'm a little different." And the next minute he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm the Antichrist." And so it's like there's a couple other moments in the film like that where key key parts of the narrative get developed like from 0 to 60. And again, I don't know if that was something that was in the script no matter who directed it. It's very it doesn't it's the kind of thing that keeps the film from it's little things like that that keep the film from being quite at the same level as the original, but it's never to the point where it derails the film, because you know that no matter what, there is going to have to become this point in the film where he realizes he's the Antichrist, right? Like that part of the plot moving forward is something we know is going to happen. It's just the way they did it is really clumsy and really like ham-fisted, really kind of botched, and it happens, like I said, more than once in the film that something like that happens. And also, Lance Henriksen is in this movie. He plays a sergeant at the military academy, like the new sergeant there, who, again, this isn't a spoiler really if you've seen the film, he is one of the devil's acolytes who's there basically at the military academy to kind of keep an eye on Damien. And once you're done watching the movie, and this was when Henriksen was just starting to kind of come up on the rise, this is around the time he was doing Network and Close Encounters, racking up these good supporting roles, but, pre-Aliens and Terminator and Pumpkinhead and all that stuff in the 80s that took him to that next level. Once the film's done, you're like, I finished watching it. I'm like, did we even need him in that movie? Like, he's good, but he's an acolyte of the devil, and there's another acolyte of the devil within the Thorn Industries, a business empire. And I was kind of like, why did they just combine those two characters into one? Because you get so little of Lance Henriksen's character. It feels a little strange. It's like leaves a little taste in your mouth after the film's done. You're like, did we even need this person? And I'm not just saying that because it's Lance Henriksen and we're used to him as a bigger name nowadays when we watch it. But even just watching it in the context of, the sides of his character, like it seems a little strange because when he's around, the camera pays a lot of attention to him, like, oh, this is like a really important guy. He's the sergeant at the military academy. He's watching over Damien. But then when the film's done, you're kind of like processing it and you're thinking, well, he wasn't really in that much of the film. Did we really need him there at all? In fact, did we even really need the whole military academy setting? Like there's several scenes that take place in the military academy, but when all is said and done, and this is something I'm still kind of working out in my head, but it's like, what part did that really even need? What part did that play in the development of Damien's character or the narrative? I mean, I guess one could argue like, well, if he's going to rule the world one day, he would have to have some kind of military training, but that's never really emphasized in the film, that like he's at this military academy and becoming the next Sun Tzu or something. It's not like that is the point of the film. It's really just him being at the military academy and having these experiences, like the encounter with Lance Henriksen, where Lance Henriksen's like, read the Bible, find out who you are, or a scene where his cousin Mark is being beat up by a bully, and Damien pulls out some psychic powers to get the bully to back off. But other than like a change of setting, I don't know that the military academy whole aspect really plays a necessary part of the film. But the interesting thing is when you read about the making of the movie and you read interviews with Lance Henriksen, Henriksen talks about how he was working with Mike Hodges as the director, and then when Don Taylor came on, he felt like, and he wasn't, I don't think he was trying to be a diss towards Don Taylor, but he's basically like, Taylor just wanted to like, set up, get things shot, and get moving along. And it sounded like Hodges been the director right till the end, that there would have been more going on in the film than was with Henriksen's character, which might have then justified his character being there and the military academy setting. We won't know. I don't know. Unless it's in the novelization. There's a novelization of this that came out, which I have. I do have that. And sometimes novelizations of films are good to read because if they're contemporary to the film's release, because sometimes those novelizations are based not so that they can get published in time for the movie's release. They're not based on the finished product. They're based on earlier drafts of the scripts, and so sometimes they have things which explain plot holes in the final product, but can really kind of give you some interesting insight. So I should sit down and read that at some point. Jerry Goldsmith back to do the music, and like I said in the last episode, I love Jerry Goldsmith. I think he has such a mastery of bringing unusual sounds to his music scores. But at the same time, I always felt like The Omen, even though it's not it's not a bad music score or anything like that. I just never felt like that was the film that he should have won the Oscar for. I never felt like it was quite properly indicative of what he could do and what he was known for. And the interesting thing is Damien OMEN II, it's like he's back doing the Jerry Goldsmith stuff I like right from the get-go, right from the jump. He's bringing interesting and different kinds of sounds into the music, and I just thought it was really great. Total props, by the way, to Bill Butler, who shot the film. Bill Butler, cinematographer on films like Jaws and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Great cinematography. This film, not only great cinematography, great locations, great. I don't know if I want to say production design, because it looked like they were shooting on a lot of real locations. I mean, just the offices of the Thorn Enterprises have such rich, deep, textured colors. Just the use of the color palette, the cinematography, a lot of the composition is just a very visually strong movie. So really props to all of them. Cast wise, unbelievable. I mean, so not only do you have, I mean, who have we named already? We've named William Holden, Lee Grant, Lou Ayres, Lance Henriksen, Robert Foxworth, all terrific people. It's also got in it Leo McKern reprising his role from the first film of The Exorcist, Bugenhagen. Nicholas Pryor, great character actor, he's on board too. Sylvia Sidney, who I love. Underused for sure, not used properly. So if you're not familiar with Sylvia Sidney, she was a leading lady back in like the 30s into the early 40s in a lot of big films. She was in William Wyler's Dead End, Hitchcock's Sabotage, King Vior's Street Scene, and that kind of went away for a while, and then came back in the early 70s and ended up getting the Best Supporting Actress Oscar nomination for a movie called Summer Wishes, Winter Dreams. And like, so she comes back and just then starts racking up all these film credits. She was in a lot of really great TV movies, like in Early Frost, which was one of the earlier films to deal with the spread of AIDS among the gay population. She was in Radon and Tebe. And then, of course, later on, Tim Burton put her in Beetlejuice and Mars Attacks. So I love her. I love her in anything she does. She's definitely underused in this film, but just to see her is great. Alan Arbus, the great, again, great legendary character actor, really good in this. And making his film debut in an unforgettable role, Meshach Taylor, before his Designing Women years. A very memorable part in this movie, and you'll know why once you've seen it. That's another funny thing, too. Like, so, and this is kind of another example of how the film is a bit more in your face in terms of its content. But in this case, it's in a less effective way. So, we talked about the original Omen, how it's like this slowly creeping, constantly building downward spiral into darkness. And this film, Damien Omen II, is more of a, like I said, it's more of like in your face, pow, 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 horror beats, horror moments, death scenes. And sometimes, and like I said, that is not a comment as to whether it's good or bad, right? You can take that approach, and as long as you pull it off, you're going to be good. If you don't pull it off, it's going to be bad. It shouldn't be looked at as a less artistic way of doing things. But there are some things that in this film that are more on the nose, so to speak, that aren't as effective. And the original Omen, the whole idea of him being the son of Satan, Damien Thorn, there's the famous scene where the priest played by Patrick Troughton goes to warn Gregory Peck about his son and says, his mother's a jackal, and the jackal word gets drowned out. And And so later on, when he and David Warner go to the cemetery where supposedly Damien's birth mother is born, and um, I guess fast forward if this is a spoiler thing for you, but I think everybody's familiar with this film enough by now. So they go to the grave and they open up the tomb, and there's the skeleton of an animal in there, and they don't comment on it. They don't like really. It's a really effective. It's one of the most effective moments in the film because they don't actually try to take it any further than that. They open up the tomb and they see this body of an animal in there, and they just close the tomb. And they're like, "Why did they put an animal in here?" And then they just move on to like the next tomb where Gregory Peck thinks his actual birth son may be buried. And you as the audience know that like there's always been this analogy of the devil spawn, and being like the son of a jackal, and the connection between the devil and jackals, and uh, you know you know this from your biblical lore. You know this from the movie, from Patrick Troughton's character, and so to see them open up that tomb and find this animal skeleton in there, you don't process it on like a literal level, like, oh, a jackal actually like gave birth to a child in a hospital with an umbilical cord and attending physicians. No, you don't take it that literally. You're just like, his mother, he really is the son of a jackal. and and it's just this really great effective creepy moment. Now in Damien Omen 2, it's like they actually start like literalizing it. So there's a scene where you know uh, where Damien is basically out with a bunch of his military academy classmates, and something happens which requires them to get checked out at a local hospital. And the doctor, who's played by Meshach Taylor, he takes a moment to talk to William Holden and Lee Grant, and is like, there's just there's something unusual about Damien. Like I'd like to keep him for some more tests because he didn't seem to this incident which required everyone to come to the hospital. He wasn't bothered by it at all. And so later we see Meshach Taylor in the lab, going looking at samples of like Damien's blood or something, and he then is like checking it to a textbook, and he's basically like. And again, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, these cells are the cells of jackal blood. And it's like, I don't think you had to be like that literal about it. Like we're like literally Davian. It was meant metaphorically in a sense, him being the son of a jack. His mother's a jackal. Like it's metaphorical. There's a literal sense to it too. We know, but like when you're taking it down to like the DNA of it, and you're like, if you do a blood test on him, he's actually going to have jackal blood, and that's going to be the way that people this character Meshach Taylor, this doctor, becomes concerned that something more is afoot here. I feel like that's going a little too literal with the whole my mother's a jackal concept. It almost sounds a little that's starting to go to like the ridiculous territory. It made me laugh. It's cool, but it's kind of just an example, and it does that a couple times too as well. Like there's a scene where Damien's after he's kind of become aware of who he is, and he's trying to talk to his cousin Mark about it, and he's like, my mother is a jackal. like literally, he's like being like literal, like, my mother is a jackal, Mammalius jackalus. So there are moments like that in the film too, where it's a tiny bit cartoonish. Again, it's nothing that derails the film, and not at all. It doesn't even derail the scenes. It's entertaining in its own right. I don't think it was the best way to approach those parts, but hey, what you gonna do? Also, really, of course, shout out the two stars of the film, William Holden and Lee Grant. So Holden, of course, had been approached to play Gregory Peck's part for the first film and didn't. This was very near the end of Holden's life, tragically. He would die just a couple years, within like 2-3 years of this. But good job. I'm a huge fan of William Holden. Just such an interesting career too, because he kind of was like set up as like this leading man in like the mid 30s, and he had, of course, Golden Boy and Our Town were two big films, but basically it just didn't. He did not catch on, and he spent like the entire 40s as like a B leading man. And then in the 50s, he right off the jump in 1950, he had Born Yesterday and Sunset Boulevard. And then throughout the whole 50s, it's just like hit after hit. Stalag 17, Picnic, The Bridge in the River Kwai, The Bridges at Toko Ri, The Country Girl, and wins the Best Actor Oscar. They were calling him Golden Holden. And then the 60s, it was like this repeat again. In the 60s, it was just like it was very much like Brando in the 50s. Just all classics. Streetcar Named Desire, Viva Zapata, Julius Caesar, Guys and Dolls. Just one right after the other on the waterfront. And then in the 60s, it was like Brando's filmography is considered pretty forgettable from a more objective standpoint, and the same thing with Holden. And it wasn't until 1969 when Holden does The Wild Bunch that then he's back. It's like Holden's back, and he does Network, and which gets him another Oscar nomination. He wins the Emmy for The Blue Knight. He's in The Towering Inferno. And I just kind of wonder what would have happened to him had he lived longer. He wasn't that old when he died. But he does good. He's definitely does good. He's just such a welcome presence. He does a good job in the role. And Lee Grant, I love Lee Grant. Can't get enough of Lee Grant. She's still with us, amazing in her 90s. Of course, a very multi-faceted talent who is so adept at drama and comedy. Incredibly beautiful, very courageous woman. She was a victim of the Hollywood blacklist early on. She got the Oscar nomination, Best Supporting Actress for Detective Story in the early 50s, and then fell prey to the blacklist, but was able still to kind of get in some different films here and there. Cornell Wilde, the great leading man, he directed a movie in the 50s called Storm Fear, a film noir, and he had her back despite what was going on with the blacklist and got her role in that. And then in the late 60s, she was really starting to come back strong, Valley of the Dolls and The Heat of the Night. And then, got her another nomination for The Landlord, Best Supporting Actress, won the Oscar for Shampoo, and on a roll. And she did some directing too. And she's just great. You can't go wrong with a Lee Grant movie. There's no such thing. So it's great that she was in this as well. And I got to say, props to the actor who they found to play Damien, Jonathan Scott Taylor, British actor. And the accent thing, it kind of comes and goes. The idea is that obviously we know that Damien his parents are American, but he grew up in England, but he was 5 when they died. So then he comes to Chicago. So I don't know, I'm not a linguistics expert, but I don't think he should have much of a British accent if he's spent 7 of his 12 years. And those are the majority of the first few years, it's not like he's speaking at all. I would think he wouldn't have much of an English accent. And it kind of comes and goes throughout the film. But I thought he, just performance-wise, he did good. He didn't lean into, the self-aware I am evil child kind of thing. I thought they did really good in choosing him. He's got great looks for the part. He does a good job at the part. So I thought it was refreshing to see him kind of in that role, because it's just the kind of role that it'd be easy to cast someone who's just obviously sinister looking, right? And he was just a really good choice for that. And he continued to act until the late 80s, but I don't think he's, in terms of the film and television, at least, he hasn't really done anything since then. Yeah, but Jonathan Scott Taylor, check him out. And it's kind of had me thinking too, I talked last episode about I'm not really into the whole evil kids things, evil kid films by default, because again, I think that sometimes they rely too heavily on the contrast between the perceived innocence of a child and the evil things happening in the film. And then I was thinking about The Good Son, because as I was reading about the OMEN films, references would come up to The Good Son with Macaulay Culkin, the 90s film. And I liked that film. I enjoyed that film. And that kind of got me thinking, well, why is it I enjoy that film? And I don't know, I think maybe, that kind of speaks to what I was talking about, is in The Good Son, where Macaulay Culkin, if you haven't seen The Good Son, Elijah Wood goes to live with his uncle and aunt, and they have his cousin is the good son, Macaulay Culkin, who's basically a sociopath. And I think that whole take that they had, The Good Son, it was this. It was very self-aware, very cognizant that they were kind of treating this kid as a sociopath, and even though they were trading in on, they were to a degree trading on the contrast between Macaulay Culkin as an actor being known for Home Alone, and him in this film playing an R-rated villain. They weren't within the narrative of the film doing that. They weren't trying to lean back on like him being cutesy wootsy and at the same time horribly evil. I mean, that's kind of one of the things with The Bad Seed, the classic 56 horror film, which I enjoy, but like it does kind of to a degree really slam home the whole idea that she's this beautiful, cute, innocent blonde who also kills people, and they really play into that, lean into that whole, like I said, that whole contrast between her, how she appears and acts towards people, and what she's really like inside, and they really lean into that and really focus on that in an attempt to further emphasize the horror of it all, the horror of what's going on. Whereas a movie like The Good Son, it kind of just presents you in a more factual way with the idea of like, this is a sociopath, this is a real life. This isn't somebody who we're trying to sell one minute as, mama's little boy, and the next minute he's like a turnabout, two-faced person who's then an evil psychopath. No, we're trying to present a little bit more realistic portrayal of like he's just an all-around 100% sociopath, and we're gonna wind up this character and let him do what a sociopath would do. And I think in the Damien Omen II, I mean, it's obviously kind of different because there's this whole supernatural element, and he doesn't fully realize who he is even until like 2/3 of the way through the film. But again, I think it was good that in this film they didn't try to find like some actor who looked angelic with like a cherubic face and obviously he can't be a blonde because Damon's not supposed to be a blonde, but like, with angelic qualities and long blonde hair. They found a kid who looked like he could be taken seriously as evil incarnate without it being over the top. They didn't try to, present him as like this, favored son. Everybody, like I said, like everybody's handsome little boy, and then 2 seconds later, have him do something horrific. They took a more nuanced backseat approach to it, and I think that was really a wise choice. And the casting of Scott Taylor was serviced that really well. So Damien Omen II, check it out if you can. I have the Scream Factory box set of the Omen movies, which I don't know if I mentioned that last time. They put out the whole box set, which has been discontinued. I don't know if it's actually out of print yet because good old Disney. They bought Fox. They can't, and they're not renewing all these licenses on Fox titles that other companies have. So who knows when the Omen will come back out. But there is the Omen prequel, as I mentioned in the last episode, coming out later this year, the first Omen. And that actually is going to be to take this full circle back to the beginning of the episode, that will be the first movie, the first Disney movie, because Disney owns Fox, that'll be the first one that Sony handles the physical media for. Now that they're going to be taking over that, so I'm curious to see will they, now that Sony's taking over physical media for Disney, and now that Shelf Factory's license is basically ended or about to end for the Omen, will then we see a new box set? Who knows? But if you can track down the box set, it's got some really good extras, got some interviews with several of the cast members and stuff. So, Damien Omen II. Thumbs up for sure. All right. Thank you very much for tuning into this week's episode of Carpet City Cinema. Don't forget to like us and give us great reviews on whatever platform you're listening to us, and spread the word about this podcast. Hope you have a great week, and we'll be back soon.